he operates his businesses in a real smart, intelligent way where it's all about replication, it's all about systems, and he wants to make sure that he himself is not necessary.
Welcome to the Cleaning Up Podcast, Millionaire Secrets of the Home Services Industry, brought to you by me, Ron Holt, CEO and founder of Two Maids and a Mop, America's fastest growing cleaning company. I get a chance to sit down with home service industry pros and other entrepreneurial leaders so they can share their stories, their insight, their experiences. It's so much fun. You're going to learn so much. And you're going to be inspired to take your small business into a national brand just like I did. Let's jump right into the interview. Today, we have Scott Greenberg. So Scott Greenberg is a former franchisee. He is a former and I guess even current motivational speaker to business owners and entrepreneurs across the country. And probably more importantly than all that, he is the author of a really excellent book that I've had the pleasure of reading called The Wealthy Franchisee: Game-Changing Steps to Becoming a Thriving Franchise Superstar. And I know everyone listening to this interview today wants to be a franchise superstar, and I want you to be one as well. And so Scott's here today to share those secrets that he's learned along the way, becoming as a franchisee and also talking to other franchise owners. So welcome, Scott, to the Two Maids and a Mop podcast.
Thank you, Ron. Glad to be here.
All right. So I teased a lot there in the opening. We're going to talk about all the great nuggets you have to share in your awesome book. But before we get to that, what's your background? What should we know about you before we start listening and trusting what you have to share with us today?
Sure. Well, long before becoming a franchise business owner, I was doing straight out motivational speaking, talking about resilience, talking about leadership and peak performance. And it was going very well. So it involved a lot of travel, a lot of presentations for a variety of groups and organizations. And it was great. I was making money. I was, the dream was to be a national speaker, and that happened, and started speaking outside the country. But then my wife and I decided to start a family, and I didn't want to be the dad who's never around. So I didn't want to quit professional speaking, but I wanted to cut down, and that meant getting another stream of income. The other thing that was going through my mind is that there are a lot of professional speakers out there who haven't done much other than speak. So a lot of them are quoting each other or reciting things that are in books, but they haven't actually had much firsthand experience, especially in leadership. And so I didn't want to be one of those people. I wanted some real experience. I wanted some new stories. I wanted to create my own content based on firsthand experience. So for me, the idea of starting another business on top of speaking was for it to be a leadership laboratory as much as a source of income. And I like the idea of a franchise because from a scientific standpoint, it's a better way of studying things, because you can look at all these people who are running the same business, but getting different results. And if I could identify what the variables were, well, not only would that help me run a better business, it would help me help others run theirs. So that's why I like the idea of running a franchise. And so it was my father who showed me an airline magazine ad for a new franchise out of Connecticut called Edible Arrangements. And I was really intrigued by the photo. It was this big, beautiful floral arrangement made out of fresh fruit. And I was thinking, well, here in Los Angeles with the entertainment industry, there's a lot of healthcare. There's a lot of gift giving, sending of baskets. We're also, we value health out here. So the idea of, a healthy gift seemed really great. So before I knew it, I was on an airplane off to Connecticut, going through a discovery day, and started signing lots of things, franchise agreement and a lease, lots of checks, the front of the check, not the back of the check,
right.
Unfortunately, not yet. And I was off and running. So, we worked really hard, but the advantage for me was that it wasn't just about making money. It was also about learning and experimenting. And it helped that I had, still had, good income from my speaking business. I didn't have to rely quite as urgently on the revenue from my Edible Arrangements franchise, which gave me the opportunity to experiment and try different things and constantly learn about, okay, what does it really take here to make customers come back? And how can I really inspire my employees? Because the initial tricks I tried with my employees that I've been talking about for years on stage, it didn't work. When I was actually with real people making, hourly wages, they didn't read the same leadership books that I had read. They didn't know how they were supposed to be responding to my brilliant leadership magic. So I had to kind of wipe the slate clean and really come from a place of being a student rather than an expert. And that really, really served me well. So we had a few bumps in the beginning, as all franchisees do, but we learned and we got better, and sales grew, and we paid down debt, and we started climbing in the rankings. And before I knew it, we won some awards, and out of had 105 stores in California, and in a given week, we usually ranked in the top 5. Very often we were number 1. And then a few years into it, another location not far away was made available, and I took it over. It was ranked 104th out of 105. The story would be better if it was 105th, but I'll give the guy credit. It was 104th. So we took it over, turned it around, and made it profitable within a year. So it was a really, really great experience. We made very good money while we were doing it. I certainly made money in the back end when I sold 5 years ago. More importantly, I learned a lot. And what was great is I still have a speaking business. Well, a number of speakers bureaus found out that I had this experience in franchising, and suddenly I was getting hired to keynote franchise conventions for other brands. Well, part of my process for any presentation I give is I interview as many audience members during the 1 or 2 months before the presentation as possible. I want to know what's on their minds and what are the issues and what are the questions they have so I can customize my presentation. Well, that resulted in me interviewing a lot of franchisees, and I still do this. I interview a lot of franchisees with every brand, and I interview their top performers. I interview the people who are struggling and those who are in between. And when you do that enough, in enough brands, in enough locations, across enough industries, you start to see the trends. And you see what all the great franchisees around the world, what they all have in common. Besides the obvious, like, marketing and hard work, that's not the secret to success. That's a prerequisite. There's a lot more going on. There's also a lot of similarities with struggling and mediocre franchisees. So all the work that I do now is about helping franchise business owners understand what top franchisees, who I call wealthy franchisees, what are they doing? What do they all have in common? What can the rest of us do so we can replicate their success? So based on all that, I got a book deal with Entrepreneur Magazine and released this book just a few weeks ago. We're really kind of trying to capture everything that I've learned. And so I continue to interview a lot of franchisees and a number of really great franchisors in the creation of that book. And that's what brings me here today.
Well, that's a pretty thick resume you have there. And it's almost a little bit of a unicorn because let's just face it, most speakers, even great speakers, don't have a ton of practical experience behind them. And so the fact that you can get on a stage and not just talk about owning a business, not just talk about customer service, but talk about what it's like to be a franchisee, that's pretty powerful stuff. And on top of that, I have a lot of admiration for your brand that you're in. Edible Arrangements I can't say that I've been a huge customer of Edible Arrangements just because, I eat unhealthy and fruits are healthy. I guess there's some sugar in there, so that might help. But I'm a big fan of the founder. Terry Farid was and still is a big mentor to me, and a lot of the business process and practices that we implement here within the Two Maids and a Mop franchise model was born from early mentoring sessions with him. So it's for you to be successful in that brand. And I know a lot of other operators in that brand, that network, and there's a lot of strong performance. It's pretty impressive. So I guess you've passed the test. We can listen to you and trust you from now on.
Well, good. Thank you. One thing that was interesting about Edible Arrangements is when I signed on, they were on the verge of an explosion. So my first store was store 250. That was my official number. And within a couple of years, there were more than 1,000 locations. So I watched that brand grow, from the size it was to something enormous. And I know what it's like to have a CEO's cell phone number. You can just text him with a question to suddenly you have to make an appointment because he just is so much busier. So I saw how the company evolved and changed. And I saw the different kinds of franchisees they had. And it was so great to be part of that journey, to see the necessary ways in which they had to innovate and change the operation, how the culture of the company evolved. And it continues to, like anyone. It's actually doing really well right now, that brand. And I'm very, very proud of having had that experience. It was a great place to learn franchising.
Yeah, I think a great brand. We'd all in the franchise world love to simulate the success that you guys have had there inside that brand. So let's talk about wealthy franchisees and what that really means. The word wealth sometimes is probably kind of an ugly word because it usually gets tied to money, but let's talk about how you define a wealthy franchisee. What does it look like for the everyday successful franchise owner?
Well, the word wealth in the title is certainly meant to be a hook. if the name of the book was How to Be a Fulfilled Franchisee, um, I think there's a lot of franchisees who wouldn't read it in the first place. So I'm trying to sort of meet a lot of people where they're at. And my hope is that the book delivers on that promise, but hopefully a lot more. So what I say very early on in chapter 1 of the book, there's actually 3 criteria to be a wealthy franchisee. The first one is the obvious one, which is that you're making good money. And that's a relative term based off of the size of your investment, based off of your expectations, and based off of where you live. I live in Los Angeles. My brother lives in Greensboro, North Carolina. My house is half the size of his. It's worth twice as much. Of course, the mortgage is also considerably more. He can live a lot better in Greensboro than I can in Los Angeles for the same amount of money. So, it's relative. So it depends on, how much you've invested and what your expectations are. But the idea is that based on those things, you're making good money. You're getting a good financial return on your investment. But if you have 2 franchisees running the same business and they're both making, let's say, $100,000, but one is doing it working 20 hours a week and the other is working 80 hours a week, they're not equals. So the second criteria for being a wealthy franchisee is that you're in control of your time. If you look at a profit and loss statement, the bottom half that lists the expenses, what's not there is the time that you put in that franchise and the Little League games you missed and the ballet recitals and the family dinners and the stress and the arguments you had with your spouse because you're just in such a difficult, bad mood because you had a rough day. There's a lot that's not reflected in that P&L. So a big part of that is time. You can always make more money, but time is something you're only going to have less of. So to be a wealthy franchisee, in addition to making good money, you need to be in control of your time. And top franchisees, that is the case. And that's why they're able to go on vacation. They have time to spend their money. They have time to open multiple locations or buy multiple territories because time is something that they have more of. A good financial investment should lead to more money. A good use of time should yield more time. So that's the second criteria. The third one is quality of life, that your life should be better for having your business in it. Ron, I will tell you that I put my edible arrangement stores up for sale every year on February 14th. Valentine's Day was so stressful that I thought there's not enough money in the world to make me want to endure this. That's it. I'm done. And then February 15th rolls around and suddenly things are calm and I'm looking at the bank account. And it's like, all right, I can handle this. But if the business was that stressful a lot more times throughout the year, it would be taking a lot of days off my life and it wouldn't have been worth it. And I meet franchisees who truly hate what they do. The idea of going into their business makes them sick. Life is too short. Your life should be better for having a business. So to qualify as a wealthy franchisee, and all the franchisees who I profile throughout my book meet these qualifications. They're all making good money. They're in control of their time and their life is better for having a business in it.
That's good stuff. And I know from experience reading the book and talking to you that when you talk about a wealthy franchisee, it really encompasses the entire landscape, right? You talk to people in food service, you talk to folks in retail and also people in the service business like we are. So this is not really segmented. It's not an industry definition. This is all franchising. It's a business owner, correct?
Yeah, because let's face it, a franchise isn't just a business, it is a lifestyle, regardless of the product, service, or solution that you offer. It's a very specific way of running a business. You're investing your own money. And there's a lot on the line, and it can mess with your head. It certainly impacts your life. So yeah, these concepts have nothing to do with the particular widget that you're selling.
Yeah, and I can only relate to my own life, and I've seen it also in a lot of our more mature, successful franchisees, the investment up front. And when I say investment, I'm really speaking more of the time investment. It's almost sort of like a parenthood, that the investment you provide young children when they're 0 to 3 years old is considerably more than what they are when they're 30 years old. It's the same relationship, obviously a very different type of dynamic. But the investment that you provide as a parent is much different than as a 30-year-old son or daughter than it is when that son or daughter is 2 or 3 years old. And I kind of look at the same type of investment with a business. I know when I was early on in Two Maids and a Mop world in Florida, I don't even know how I pulled it off, but it was 70, 80-hour weeks, 7 days a week. Even when I wasn't working, I was working. I look back on those days and go, how did I do it? And then I look back at what I'm doing right now, where we have 80 plus stores across the country. We're in a national brand. We've won all these great awards, and I'm not working 80 hours a week. It shouldn't. Life's logic says it should not work that way. If you were working hard early on, you should work triple, later on. But it doesn't really work that way in franchise ownership.
You're right. And I think if you only work hard early on, then you're going to work hard later on. But if you work hard and work smart early on, then you'll be able to work a little bit less. And I love your analogy of comparing it to parenting. When you think about the goal of parenting, it's heartbreaking. We are raising our kids to not need us. We're raising our kids to operate independently. And I think that's the case with our businesses. We want to hire the right people, develop them into leaders, put the right systems in place so that we personally don't necessarily have to be there to give us more time. So you have to invest a lot of time up front, but if you invest it wisely and you work intelligently, in the back end, you're going to have a lot more free time. So it's less heartbreaking with the business than it is with kids. My son is a senior in high school, and he's definitely become the independent kid we want him to be. It's heartbreaking for us because, I want the kid who,
right.
You get the idea, but that's what you sign on for. With the business, it's not quite as heartbreaking when the business can run without me.
Right. All right. So we know what that successful, wealthy franchisee is supposed to look like. What are some of the things you saw after interviewing so many different franchisees from across the country? I know you talk about the myths that are sort of perpetuated across the country and the landscape here in franchising, but those myths, while a lot of people can agree with, they're still hard to sort of embrace, right? Because they're still difficult things to just sort of get past. But why don't we share some of those myths that you think exist within the franchise world?
It's such an important question because, what's great about franchising is you have all these people who are running the same business. And so you want to figure out what are the top people doing that you can do so you can get the same results. The problem is people ask the wrong questions. They make assumptions. They draw the wrong conclusions. And therefore, they're really not replicating the entire recipe of successful franchisees. And so consequently, there are a lot of myths. When I do these interviews with franchisees before a presentation, one of the questions I like to ask the struggling franchisees, I would really like to ask, what's your problem? Why aren't you succeeding? That would make them defensive. So what I'm interested in asking then is, the people who are really killing it in your brand, who are making a lot of money, why do you think that is? And so I hear their perceptions as to what the advantages are of the top franchisees. And that's how I identified these myths. And what was interesting is that when my business really took off with edible arrangements, I'd have conversations with people and they would make little comments about my business, assuming that that's why we were great. And so I'll give you an example. Probably the most common myth about top franchisees is that they have winning locations. If it's, restaurant or retail, the physical location is great. If it's something that's more service-oriented like yours, where people say, well, that person just have a really great territory. They have the right kind of homes, the right kind of demographics. We don't have that where we are. People love to talk about location. Now, when we look at the value of real estate itself, we've all heard that it's about location. And that's true in terms of the value of real estate. When it comes to business revenue, when I look at these top franchisees, it did not actually correlate with them having the best locations. Because when you buy a franchise, the best locations within your territory may not be available or they may not be affordable. But what I learned about these great franchisees is actually most of their locations are adequate. They're good enough, but they run them extraordinarily well, and that's what makes the difference. And in fact, another thing they tend to do is they tend to take over struggling locations where the previous owners wrote it off and just said, it's a really bad territory, it's just a bad location, people don't want to come here. These great people turn them around. I know that, Ron, you read the book, and so you read the example of Burke Jones from the UPS store. Massive brand, locations everywhere, thousands.
Great story, though. I can't wait for you to share it here.
Yeah, and so he's had, I think, 5 locations. Twice, he's turned around struggling locations where the previous owners thought, well, it's just a bad physical location. And twice, he's built those locations into the #1 store in the entire UPS store chain. One of them was just some mediocre location with no geographic advantages. The other, not only was it a mediocre territory, it was 2 doors away from a FedEx office store. The competition was right there. But he put all of his emphasis on customer service. And consequently, people will drive farther, they'll pay more to do business with him because he gives them such an extraordinary experience. Um, there's so many brands that have stories of people who took over locations that others had written off, and they make them great. And so I think sometimes people think they're a great franchisee because they're doing well, when really it's just their location. So it's not that having the right territory or a great, visible location where you're, close to the right kinds of customers. It's not that that's not advantageous. I'm just saying it's not necessary. So it's just a complete myth. And most great franchisees, it's just adequate territories, adequate locations, run extraordinarily well. That's a huge truth. And so my first edible arrangements was outside of Beverly Hills. Well, people thought, well, that must mean it's a bunch of rich people who are lining up down the street because they just want to give away all their Benjamins. These people didn't get rich by just spending their money loosey-goosey. And I'll be honest with you, edible arrangements are wonderful and beautiful, but I wouldn't say they're like exotic. And these people are not going to use those things, for a wedding. So most of our actual clients were not these residents of Beverly Hills. That's not who really was driving business in our store. And so when people say, well, just because your location, they don't look at our Yelp reviews. They didn't look at our customer service scores. They didn't look at all the other things they were doing. They just made this assumption. So I spent a lot of time in this one myth because it's so huge. And so I want people to know, regardless of where your business is, your territory, chances are if you run it wisely, it's going to do a lot better. So you really have no idea how good your location is until you make your operation excellent. So that is the first myth. Second myth, wealthy franchisees are slaves to their business. They're workaholics. They work 24/7. This is simply not true. These people, they don't work hard as much as they work smart. They embrace the systems. They execute the systems really well. Very early on, they develop their employees into leaders to give them more time. So all these great franchisees who I interviewed, they travel and they're home for dinner and they have time to run other businesses. The franchisee with 40 locations has no more hours in his day than someone who just has one. But he operates his businesses in a real smart, intelligent way where it's all about replication, it's all about systems, and he wants to make sure that he himself is not necessary. So no, these people absolutely are not workaholics. It's not necessary. Now, there's actually one franchisee who she and her husband operate with just one assistant manager and a couple leads across. They have 8 franchises in 4 locations. Each location has both franchises. It's co-branded. They run it all themselves, and they work 80 hours only because they love it, because they have fun doing it. They don't have to, they choose to. With that as the exception, all the other franchisees I met live very normal lives without being slaves to the business. So wealthy franchisees, they make the business work for them, not the other way around. Another myth, wealthy franchisees, they must have a lot of business experience or a lot of education. Simply not true. Some do, but many don't. Some of the best franchisees, all they've ever done is just, been franchisees. They learned on their feet on the floors of their stores rather than in school. As I mentioned, my son is a senior in high school. We recently did some college visits. Believe it or not, we actually, in the pandemic, were able to visit some schools. And he told one school he's interested in majoring in business. So we got to meet with the chair of the business department, and she showed him a list of all the classes he would take as a business major. And I looked at these things, like statistics and things like that. I'm thinking, this is great for an intellectual understanding of business. But to run a franchise, there ain't nothing here that's going to help. There's nothing about customer service. There's nothing about overcoming adversity. There's nothing about inspiring employees. None of that stuff was there. Not that there wasn't value in what they would be teaching. There's great value in that. But I wouldn't say it was a lot of practical skills that's going to help someone run a business. Now, I have a lot of franchisors who tell me that they often struggle when a franchisee comes with a lot of business experience because those people have a hard time letting go of what they know and embracing the system. So Paul D'Amico, who's the CEO of Global Franchise Group, told me he won't sell to doctors or lawyers. He said they can invest, but he doesn't want them anywhere near the operation. Because even though they're great at running their practices, they have a hard time letting go of their vision of how things should be and really embracing these systems that he's proven can work. So yeah, no correlation between education and business experience and thriving in a franchise. Now, if your business experience, let's talk about customer service, but how to engage employees, about marketing or bookkeeping, those are transferable skills. That's advantageous. But these are things you can learn running a franchise. So no correlation there. The last myth I'll mention is people say you really have to be passionate about the business. Ron, do you love cleaning homes?
I absolutely do not love cleaning homes.
Okay. I had no great affection for fruit. I mean, it's fine, but there was no passion there. Rhoda Olson, who's the vice chair of Great Clips, she's like, passionate about the business? That's BS. This is work. But what she said, what I agree with, there's got to be something about the business that you love. And for me was I like the idea of helping people celebrate special occasions. That I like. That got me excited. I was excited by the idea of really developing employees into leaders. I really love that challenge. Maybe it's my background as a motivational speaker. You need to love something about the business, but it does not have to be the product, service, or solution that you offer. So those are the most common myths that I see. And I just think that it would be wise to really study wealthy franchisees and really get to the truth about their success rather than making assumptions.
Yeah, all such good stuff. One of the things that I see, even in our network, and I'm going to sort of point the finger at myself, but some of our best, highest performing franchisees, unfortunately, sometimes also gets double branded, co-branded as my favorites. And, I hate that designation. And I don't know if I necessarily believe it, but I do know that the highest performers all echo a lot of the similar traits that you've just talked about, that there is a level of hard work, but at the same time, there's some opportunity for them to pursue their personal passions. We have one really high performing franchisee that's a former college tennis player, and the success of the business has allowed him to sort of get back into the game of tennis. But the first year and a half of his business, there was no tennis. So all of the things that you just talked about, I can look across our network and see one or two or three different folks, and they really fit that criteria.
Yeah, it's true. Look, in the beginning, you obviously have to work really hard. You have to learn the business, and you have to put in the long hours in the beginning so that you can eventually work the smart hours. But like you said, when your kid is 30, it's very different than when your kid is 3 months old and won't sleep during the night, and the workload is not the same. And if you do a good job in the beginning, you're going to find you have a lot more time in the back end.
All right. So if you're okay with this, in full disclosure, I did not prep Scott with these questions, but I've got 2 or 3 questions for you that hopefully you can answer based on your experience as a franchisee and also all the interviews that you've conducted over the last little bit composing this book. You ready for that challenge?
Sure. Lay it on me.
All right. So we talked about the early time investment during a franchise versus what it looks like down the road when you're more mature, more successful. What type of emotional roller coaster can you expect during that time frame? Because when you look back on the success of our most successful franchisee, when you look back on it, it looks like it's just straight up to the moon. But the reality is there's plenty of valleys, plenty of lows, and a lot of failure. How do you deal with that emotional roller coaster?
Well, first of all, expecting it in the first place is important. And I don't think most people really consider that. When people sign a franchise agreement, they have a vision of what they want the business to be. They're thinking about the idea of working for themselves and having this great team of people where it's like a family and it's love and they're making money and loyal customers. No one signs a franchise agreement and says, wow, I can't wait to have some of my equipment break down. And when my employees ghost and don't show up, that's going to be fantastic. And when there's, unfair reviews that are posted on Yelp about the business, that's the best. No one thinks about that. That's not part of the vision. But it becomes part of the reality. There are a lot of factors that we don't control. Certainly none of us could anticipate the pandemic and how that would impact our businesses. So knowing in advance there's going to be a lot of surprises, some ups and some downs will normalize those things. So it won't be so shocking when they happen. We can't anticipate what's going to happen, but something is going to happen. So knowing that in advance, I think is good. But like any roller coaster, part of it is the stomach that we bring to it. So 2 people can have the exact same business experience. For someone, it's going to be traumatic, and for someone, it's going to be inconvenient. It all depends on your mindset, on your sensibility, and your tolerance for surprises. And so, again, knowing that in advance is important, but also making sure that you have built-in coping mechanisms. So I think that, what the studies have shown is people who meditate, people who take walks, people who engage in a lot of self-care are just more resilient. And all franchisees meditate. We just have different focal points. Some people focus on their breathing, some focus on a mantra, some focus on the bills, some focus on the stress, but all of us get super focused on the same things. The idea is to be more deliberate about it. But there absolutely is going to be a roller coaster. There's going to be ups, there's going to be downs. It's going to constantly change. It's never going to stop. So we need to develop the stomach for it. And if we do, I think the journey can be a lot better, and we can focus on the areas where we do have control. And that ultimately is what will decide how successful we're going to be.
So great question, great answer. So you talked about your experience as a franchisee in edible arrangements. You really had two different distinct experiences. One was a ground floor opportunity where you built it from the literal ground up, no customers, no employees, nothing. The other, you actually went the opposite route. You took an existing store that was floundering and you turned it around into a successful store. So if you could look back on that time, and even when you can relate to some of the interviews you've had with other franchisees, what's the experience like for that resell failing store versus from the ground up, nothing? Is it very similar, or are they as different as they sound?
Emotionally, I think there were some differences. Operationally, they became similar, but not at the beginning. Look, when I started off, with that first business, I thought, I've bought this franchise and it's going to be successful from the beginning. That was my mindset going into it. And then it was, shocking that it was a lot harder than I thought. With the second location, I was acquiring a patient that was sick, where there were problems. So before I could focus on success, I had to undo the problems, starting with Yelp reviews. And the problems were worse than I thought. This was a location that was closed down by the corporate office because of non-compliance and poor performance. And it appeared that the previous owner had basically walked away. So I thought, for the cost of a franchise agreement, I was going to get a set of keys, just sign the lease, and I have a store already built, ready to go, just switch on the lights and start making fruit baskets. Well, it turned out that not only was the store built in a way that it wasn't quite right, but right before we got started, the previous owner came in during the night and gutted the place. When I say the place had no kitchen sink, the guy literally stole the kitchen sink. I mean, it belonged to him, but he took the kitchen sink. He took the outdoor edible arrangements light. That alone was $10,000 for me to replace. So when I signed the new franchise agreement, I thought I was getting a store already built. I basically had to rebuild it. So the cost there was just not part of the plan. So that was shocking, but we did it and we made it beautiful. So that, that part was nice. It was, certainly fresh aesthetics, but then we had to undo what had been done, really change the way, the reputation, change the service. So it was a different approach, but we went into it having learned a lot from the first store. There were some places where there could be overlap, certainly in terms of marketing. In the afternoons, we could have one delivery driver who could service both stores. So there's some advantages there. But it was a little bit scary. It's like, okay, the first store is doing well. Was it because we knew what we were doing, or was it because of luck? We were about to find out by replicating what we were doing and seeing the results that we got. But I will say overall, though, I wish I had opened a second location sooner. I wish I had expanded sooner. I think the real money to be made in franchising is by having multiple territories, multiple locations, if the system allows it. Because there's, once you've learned something, your learning curve is a lot quicker the second time around.
Yeah, and that we see a very similar situation here in our own network. We're I don't know if we're still called an emerging brand or not. We've been franchising now for 17 years. We've been in the cleaning industry for more than 17 years. But we do have less than 100 territories open for business right now. So I think that probably puts us square in that emerging brand territory. But either way, we've got a lot of hungry entrepreneurs, and they, for the most part, all want to own multiple territories. And we've sort of made a commitment to them to grow with them. But to do that, we wanted them to sort of get their feet wet, get their hands dirty, pardon the pun, early on with this business, and then really understand the business and make sure that they really wanted to own more than one store. So we're at that phase of growth where we're seeing more and more of those single unit franchisees grow into multi-units. And it's fun to see, not just because of the growth, but also you can see the sort of fire rekindled in there. in their lives. They're sort of getting back to that startup mode almost, and you can feel the passion, you can hear the passion in their voice. And obviously you want to see people succeed and do well in life as well. And so we're starting to see a lot of those things. And, my vision in my head for me is, one day riding on the boat and, looking back and seeing what all the success we had. But others, like you said earlier, may want to just keep working. That's what they want out of life. So really cool experiences here and great stories you have to share. I just have one other question for you. It's something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. I've talked a lot about this particular topic with our franchisees. A lot of the people we've had, even on this podcast, have talked about it. But you mentioned one thing that you learned as a franchisee, and again, what you've learned from other franchisees is that when you serve a customer, that it's actually one of two ways to serve that customer. One is build a relationship. The other is make a transaction. And make a transaction seems to be what most people think when they talk about customer service. But we're in a new time of life, right? And everybody talks about the new normal. In my opinion, the new normal is it's no longer customer service, it's customer experience. And so tell us a little bit about what you've seen with some of these great high-performing franchisees and what they do for their customers that separates them from other less performing franchisees.
I can understand how something like marketing is very mysterious. It's something that's always changing. It's something that some of us don't know a lot about. It's expensive. I support it. I think it's important, but I can understand why it's mysterious. But I don't understand why customer service is mysterious, because we've all been customers. We know the difference between a good experience and a bad experience and how that impacts what we do as consumers. You'd think then, with that understanding, that every business owner would provide a superior customer experience. But as we all know, they don't. And for us business owners, that's our advantage, that we can use a better customer experience to outdo the competition. But in order to do that, we have to serve the customers at two levels. And one is the operational level, which is meeting their need. They come to us for a product, a service, or a solution. In your case, people need their homes cleaned. That is the sort of external need. There's an internal need that they themselves aren't aware of, and that is something emotional. Ultimately, we want to feel good. So one thing I talk about with franchisees is always try to identify what is the emotion that the customers are chasing. At Edible Arrangements, people wanted fruit baskets, but what they were chasing, well, I discovered, was celebration. They were also chasing reassurance. They were always worried, is the basket going to get there in time? So we made sure we celebrated with them and that we offered them reassurance. Don't worry, I'm going to personally make sure it gets there. And then when it got there, we'd call the sender and say, hey, just want you to know, it got there at 3 o'clock. She answered the door herself. She screamed when she saw it because she was so excited. And our customers loved getting that phone call, because we met their emotional need, letting them know that it was there, giving the reassurance, celebrating with them throughout the process. So regardless of what you're selling, all of us exist to make people feel better than they did before. We make them feel better through the transaction, through the encounter, through the providing of our products and services and solutions. But if we don't elevate their emotional state, we're leaving money on the table. So the idea is to always find a way to make your customers to elevate their emotions. And usually that's through building some kind of a relationship with them, relating to them human to human, rather than just as, vendor to customer.
Well, you hit it right on the head there. How they feel is what they'll remember. It's not necessarily what happens during the cleaning, but when it's all over, in our case, and in your case, when you sell the basket, it's how they feel after they leave your store or after we leave their home. And
when our cleaning lady leaves, my thought isn't just the house is clean. My thought is, wow, I feel this pride again. I feel safe again. I just stand a little bit taller when the place has been vacuumed and wiped down. I feel differently. Just like when I get my car washed, it returns that new car feeling. So I spoke to a car wash franchise and helped them understand that they're in the new car feeling business, the car pride business, not just the car washing business. And that's important, because when you understand that, you can be more deliberate about that in your marketing, in your conversations, and in your execution. And the brands that make people feel the best are the brands that win.
Well, Scott, it's been a pleasure talking to you. It's rare that we get to talk to someone that has direct experience in the franchise world. And in your case, it goes even deeper. I can't think of another resource out there that has so much knowledge behind the franchise industry as your book that just was recently published and released. And so I encourage everyone listening to this interview to pick up a copy. I think it would do a lot to not just improve your business, but improve your own life, because you can learn a lot about how to manage your life within the book. Because he's speaking to brothers and sisters just like you guys. If a franchisee for us is really no different than a franchisee in a food service or a retail business. So, Scott, what can everyone do to find more information about you, to connect with you, and obviously also pick up this great book of yours?
My website is scottgreenberg.com. It's Berg. You can find all the information on me there. So in addition to my presentations, I do coaching for franchisees, and I'm in development right now for an online course for franchisees called the Wealthy Franchisee Business Breakthrough Program. So look for that in the near future. And my book, The Wealthy Franchisee, is available wherever books are sold, certainly on Amazon, and that's something people can get now. There's the regular book, there's an audiobook, and an ebook as well.
Well, you did a great job, not just today, but in your book as well, Scott. So congratulations on it, and hopefully we'll have a chance to meet and talk again down the road.
Would love that. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet.
Hey guys, Beth Lovett in Business Development. If you enjoyed this episode, then please share with your friends, and don't forget to tune in to the next episode of Cleaning Up. Have you ever wondered if you wanted to be in business for yourself? If so, then don't hesitate to give me a call at 205-789-8027 or email me at bethl@ineedamaid.com. And if you just want a window shop, then you can see us online at twomaidsfranchise.com.